Welcome to the Stories of School Leadership podcast, the podcast where we elevate the voices of and create connections between inspirational leaders from the UK and around the world. I'm Emma Lurie, and thank you for joining me as I share these journeys, inspirations, and stories of education, leadership, and life. In this episode, I'm joined by Leanne Galloway, who is an early years consultant and specialist, a former head teacher, and an early years Ofsted Inspector. It's so fantastic to have an early years viewpoint on the podcast. We get really into talking about the early years sector and the current challenges that we are facing, reprofessionalising the early years workforce. We chat about accountability and how it can be seen from the other side of the foot with Leanne's Ofsted experience herself. So I hope you really enjoy this one, finding out a little bit more about early years and connections. Let's get going. Hi Leanne, it's so amazing to have you spending a bit of time with me in this forum, not with a cup of tea, because we know each other. So formally tell us who you are, where you are in the world.
Away from well, thank you for having me. I'm Leanne Galloway, a long-standing friend and colleague of Emma. I'm currently in Devon in England, and I have been in education for 17 years, being class teacher, senior leader, head of teaching and learning, head of early years, Ofsted Inspector, school improvement partner, and consultant. So I've done a lot, but presently my main workload is consultancy and inspecting in early years settings.
You've crammed a lot into a short space of time.
Yeah. I try.
Yeah, we like to be busy, don't we?
Yeah.
So let's go all the way back to even before you did all of those wonderful things. And I'd love to know about your own childhood experience of kind of school and what education was like for you.
Yes. I loved school, particularly primary school. Really loved it. Interestingly, whenever I walk past my primary school now, I always look at it and think, my gosh, it's really unique. Actually, very much like the small school that we both led at different times in terms of it being very Victorian, very, old fashioned and very unique, I suppose. So I grew up in a very small village in a very rural area, on the cusp of the Quantocks. So, completely naive to the wider world. I was in the country, and I have really fond memories of just being really happy, really safe, really secure, just loving. Like, I can remember flicking paint on, making these lovely pictures and being a bit cheeky, but just being in awe of my teachers, loving story time, loving being creative, and of course just being on the climbing frame in the playground. But school was always, a safe space, as was my home. I think I had a really lucky childhood in that I was just normal, just hanging out with my friends at school and out riding my bike.
What was secondary like for you?
Yeah, so secondary was different because I'd come from this tiny village going to a big comprehensive school in the town, and I wasn't used to town life. And that was good on the whole. I enjoyed secondary school. It's when I started secondary school, I got heavily into athletics, and I spent the whole of my secondary education competing. So I suppose, I studied hard and then I trained and I competed, and that was me until I was 18. So yeah, it was good. It was good. It was a little bit different and tricky for me growing up where I did, in the sense of I am and was what we would call, an ethnic minority in my village. I think we were probably the only mixed race family in that village, and I certainly remember children asking me questions which was indicative of the fact that they'd never seen someone with brown skin. And I think it's less obvious now that I'm older, but certainly in the 80s when I was running around outside, in sunshine, and we probably weren't so careful with sunscreen. I had dark hair down to, all the way down my back. I was very tanned, and you know, I looked different to the other children who were at school, and my dad he's half Indian, so you know he has very dark skin, and that was difficult sometimes because to me that's just who I was, but suddenly I realized that in the eyes of my peers I was different. And I remember that being a little bit upsetting at times, and that has posed challenges. But you know, going back 30, 40 years ago, society wasn't anywhere near as multicultural as it is now. And had I not been in a tiny village, that may not have happened. But you know, we grew up really in the sticks. But I have I had a really positive education journey. And so yeah, that's
Amazing.
yeah.
And so did any of that, you mentioned like being in awe of your teachers. Was that an indicator of like wanting to go into the profession or not? How did
Mm,
becoming a teacher happen for you?
yeah. So I wouldn't say that and I was in awe of them. You know, I loved them, and I had this one particular teaching assistant who would listen to me read. And I remember when it was common knowledge that she was leaving her role at the school, I was beside myself. I was so upset. And I'm still in touch with her to this day, actually, because her son is my age. We went to school together, and I just adored her. I think it was just like an extension of my family, I guess. And you know, I didn't know any different. I was young, but I I had a U-turn entry into teaching from what I perceived was my projected career. But interestingly, when I got to that bit in year 10, I think it is when you have to do your school work experience, I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I remember I went into the early years classroom at my primary school, my old primary school, and did a week or whatever it was in there. And I did love it. And but I think that was founded from my love of young children. And I think that came from growing up in a really big family where I was one of the eldest and I had loads of younger cousins. And I remember one of my aunties, I think I'm her third or fourth baby, you know, I was just like, baby, I just loved them. And I think I just loved being around young children and helping them. And I think it was just, I guess, like a maternal aspect
Yeah.
of wanting to just be with young children and be fun, and then wanting to help them. And then I guess part of my character is that I like facilitating and leading and teaching. But that wasn't my game plan when I started my career. Um, the reason that I became a teacher was kind of a weird element of timing. But I studied law at college. I then studied law at university, and I was all the way. I wanted to be a barrister. That's what I wanted to do. That's where my sights were. And I did well at uni. I came out with a 2-1 from Exeter, and I was chuffed with that. I was pleased. But I think in hindsight, looking back during that time when we were all applying for training contracts or to go to the bar or whatever it was completely saturated. And it very quickly became apparent to me that I didn't stand out from the crowd. Yes, I had a good degree from a good university, but I felt like lots of my peers came from privileged backgrounds and had great connections, and that was their stepping stone into that world. And at the time, my boyfriend had secured a training contract in Bath. And this one day, I was like, I want to apply for my PGCE. They do that in Bath. If I get that place, it's meant to be. And it was like an epiphany that that's what I was going to do. And I never looked back. But it was literally in the space of a day, I just completely just rethought what I was
I
going
can
to
see
do.
you being a barrister though. I
Well,
don't know if
I don't
I
know.
did know
I
you
don't
did
know.
law, but I hadn't really
Yeah,
pictured it. And actually,
yeah,
I mean, obviously, you're an incredible early years educator, so you definitely should have done that. But I could see a bit of that in you as
yeah.
well.
Well, yeah, so
And
it was a funny U-turn, and I remember my parents being quite shocked and I think truthfully a bit disappointed. They're very proud now, but I think it was just a real sudden U-turn. And so it was just kind of this thing of timing and feeling like actually, although I loved, my law degree and everything, maybe that's just not for me. And I have never looked back. And then yeah, I've been teaching and or in leadership ever since. So yeah, a bit of a
yes,
funny
it's
one.
the good thing about that way of stepping in though is that you can do any level of learning and then take on, I mean, there's lots of different routes and people have their own opinions about what's better, harder, easier.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
being able to have that level of learning and then do the PGC, like you still
yeah, yeah.
all that
And
knowledge,
that was
don't
a
you? I
worry
feel like
because
law
I
actually very important. There's a lot of legal stuff you need, especially with early years children, like
yeah,
sorting out those disputes.
yes, yes, I know exactly. But uh but then I applied to do the early years PGC because I was determined that I was early years through and through and nothing else. And that was great. I had a brilliant time training. And it was just this innate passion, I think, that I wanted to work with younger children. And it went, yeah, the rest is history, as they
The
say.
rest is history and you're still doing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, what was, I guess, in your early career and making that shift, were there, and maybe in your first teaching roles and things like that, were there
Mm.
people who inspired you to take that next step? I feel like you're very driven anyway. So, I imagine for you, stepping further up was always going to be a pathway for you. I feel like you want to do more, but were there people around you who supported you and enabled you to take that step from teaching into leadership?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I feel like my early days in education as a teacher were, you never appreciate something as much until you're no longer in that. And I spent many years in the same school, working up the ladder, as it were. Um, and the colleagues that I worked with, many of whom are now, ex-colleagues but friends, were phenomenal. I was, the youngest in in our setting to begin with. And then we were three formentary in early years. Well, first of all, we were two formentary, and then we expanded, some years later. But I had the privilege of working with ladies who had been in the game considerably longer, but I learned so much from them. But at the same time, they were, they were championing me to continue to learn and to grow and develop. And um, at one point, our existing head teacher, he took a sabbatical and he went off to Africa to do something. And so the lady who at the time was leading our early years, she stepped up, and then I stepped up to lead early years. And so um, it was, circumstantial, but it was something that I'd always wanted to do. And then it rolled from there. I was leading early years. It was, 90 children in the unit. Um, and then there was a restructure, and then I became part of a senior leadership team whereby I was then overseeing Key Stage 1 as well. And in a big school that was expanding, it then meant that I was leading across 9 classes. So it just evolves, doesn't it? Things changed. Lots of schools went through big expansions a period of years ago, particularly sort of joining multi-academy trusts. So it was always on my vision to want to lead, but it was because I've wanted to be influential and make a difference and support colleagues and make that difference for children. And I've always just got very excited about new things. I think where perhaps other colleagues have found change difficult, um, I actually thrive from that because I love learning something new. I love trying something different. I love to think that we are making a difference for the children. And then for that practice to become embedded. So I worked with a phenomenal team of teachers um, and support staff, and just have the fondest memories of my times at that school with all my colleagues from across the school. I think we were a brilliant team. I left as we came off the back of an outstanding inspection, and I remember when I took on a post not too long after that. I was like, I just don't get it. Why aren't all schools like the school that I, have had that privilege of working at? And I remember saying, I'm sure you remember saying, like, where's my Morris? Where's the caretaker that is just a diamond? He does everything. And then why is your TA not like how my TA was? And I guess, over time you kind of mold into one another, and you become, you just work so well.
Yeah.
So I just feel like those were the really good old days.
Yeah, I totally get that. And I feel like you're totally right. You don't know what you've got until it's not there anymore.
Yeah,
It becomes
yeah,
normal. So as much as you might
yeah,
enjoy it and think this is really great, you don't,
yeah,
yeah, you don't know. I remember, and I think
mm,
when in Lewis's episode when we talked about it, like I remember when we were together as a team, and then when I left on mat leave, you came and led the school. But I would say to them as a team, this isn't it's not going to last forever. And B, what we have here is really special. And they were like, yeah,
yeah,
yeah, whatever.
yeah,
And every
yeah,
single time now, it's rare that we all manage to get together in a room. Every time they're like, oh, you told us that it was. And
yeah,
even at the time, I knew it, but you'd still have to be out of it to look back and see it,
yeah,
don't you?
yeah, yeah, completely. So I just think I've been really lucky to have, wonderful colleagues, sources of inspiration, and um yeah, just a great team, like leading a team who want to be led by you, but it's not just about leading, it's about doing it together as a team, and that collegiality, and I think that's really priceless.
Yeah.
um
And it
so
takes a
yeah,
great
so
leader to build that, though. Like that doesn't happen by accident, does it?
no, I suppose not, but
We're just not very good at
it's
going,
it's just really
actually.
hard to know what that recipe is. I think a lot
Yeah.
of it is obviously as a leader, but just the other staff members. I mean, every group of people, we're all so unique, aren't we?
Yeah.
But
And
yeah,
that's where you almost can't teach it. I was speaking to someone the other day and we were kind of talking about the MPQH and other leadership programs that are really great and give you a certain level, but ultimately whenever you step into that first headship, or that's the first role where you really are that person needing to do it all,
yeah,
then who you're working with makes a difference. So you're right, there isn't one size fits all. You have to be
no,
reactive
yeah,
to what you're working
yeah,
at the time.
yeah. A bit
So,
like a chameleon, really, don't you? Because
oh yeah.
every setting is so unique, and often you come across challenges that you can't have even predicted.
No.
um but I think you have to be, really reactive and mold and dig deep sometimes, but
Oh yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. So
yeah,
I know that then we kind of touched on a little bit taking on like head of teaching learning role, which was actually I went on
yeah,
that leave and you stepped in for a bit, which was amazing. And then
yeah,
you
yeah,
fled the country to take on this
yeah,
post. I remember being so in awe of you. I was sat at home with a new baby and you're saying, I'm just going to go and take this amazing early years head opportunity
yeah,
in a
yeah,
beautiful country. So tell us a bit about
yeah.
that or those experiences.
Oh, it was one of those classic moments of buses, not one but two. And I can remember having a handover meeting with you and having a meltdown because I couldn't decide, do I stay or do I go? And it was that situation where I remember, I think I'd sort of tongue in cheek said something about stepping in, stepping up, and taking over whilst you went on mat leave. And before I knew it, I was having a conversation at your school
I was
with
like, this is a
the
good idea. Let's do it.
yeah, with the executive head, and yeah, and then term later there I was. But I had been really explicit and had said, I'm very happy to take this secondment. It's a great opportunity. And I remember saying, do you think I can do it? It's like, I don't know if I can do it. Do you think I can do it? And my head at the time and the executive head of the MAP were, really encouraging and really supportive. And I do remember, I specifically remember, I think it was like the third day in what was our office, thinking, why didn't I do this sooner? This feels so much easier than being a class teacher and a senior leader and just the volume of things that you're managing. Um, but what had happened was when I had formally agreed to take on that secondment, somewhere in the mix, I was then invited to Harrow, London, for an interview for head of early years at Harrow, Bangkok. And I just thought, well, if you don't try, you'll never go. You never get us anywhere. So I went for my interview. Um, and this one particular night, I was up, I couldn't sleep. I think I was ruminating, what's going to happen. And I had an email come in at midnight from the head of Harrow. You've got the job. I was like, oh, okay. And it was, that real, okay, well, yeah, I'm going. I had said all along, I knew when I started teacher training that I always wanted to teach abroad. When and where that would be, I couldn't have told you. And I'd done that thing where, um, I'd worked really hard on my career. I got married. My husband and I built a house. Um, and and then I think, so when was that? So 3 years after, I was like, okay, what next? What next? And then it sadly meant that I only spent a term in that secondment, but fortunately someone stepped into our shoes, and that was a great career move for them. And then before I knew it, I was living and working in Harrow, Bangkok, and I would not change it for the world. It was an incredible journey, I think, both professionally and personally. I learned so much about myself, about other people, about leadership. I think if I were a class teacher again, it would make me so much better, and make me a better teacher in terms of how I would want to do things. And of course, education is constantly evolving. So 8 years ago now that I had my own class, certainly early years practice looks so different. There's so many different pedagogical approaches. But Harrow Bangkok was transformative. I found myself leading an early years school of 18 classes. I've had over 60 members of staff. I was dealing with an expansion. I was dealing with a new build of premises for my toddlers. Um, so it was overwhelming. And in that first year, we had a great deal of work to do in terms of getting the practice where we wanted it. And of course, this was all whilst the existing team were undergoing, a change in approach and change in new leadership, and expansion. So it was a lot in the first year. But we got to a status quo come the second year, whereby we were in that lovely position for me to be able to say, look, I've led the majority of staff meetings because we've been going through a period of change and we've been stabilizing practice, and improving practice. But now it's about upskilling you guys, and you guys want, kind of deciding what your area of interest and expertise is, and you now take the lead on that, and you present and you upskill and you share and disseminate. And that was really interesting because a lot of members of staff were really reluctant to do that, and they were never forced. But it was actually, I think, a good leader is about upskilling other people, isn't it? And particularly about succession planning, and again, for your team to not be constantly listening to the same voice or voices. But it was really interesting because it was, or is, a top tier school. It's in Bangkok. The vast majority of children are Thai, but there are, expatriate children there. But it's just mind blowing, the opportunities, the facilities, and the day-to-day life that these children live. And not to say that the teaching and learning opportunities that children have here isn't great, but it is so polarized. And fundamentally, that comes down to being, a private international school where not money is no object, but they're very, very privileged.
I
And
remember
it was
having conversations with you quite along that journey, and you just saying that you just wouldn't believe the resources, the provision, the budget
yeah,
that I'm working with. And we're sat here,
yeah,
little sort of sleepy old Devon, thinking, we haven't even got enough money for glue sticks. And there you are,
yeah, yeah.
aqua park, like.
Exactly that, designing state-of-the-art splash play that's coming in from Germany and being installed, and I had complete autonomy on that. I got to design it how I wanted. And
What was the best thing
um
you bought or made or designed
what
like
was
that?
so well, during my time there, I redeveloped two outdoor spaces. So the first one was the toddler space, which was they're all kind of cylindrical. Is that the right word?
Yeah,
Um,
I think so.
so the classes open out onto a communal lawn, which is terrific because then everyone has the same offering. And so the first one was the brand new toddler building, which opened out onto a beautiful landscaped garden with trees and mounds and a sand pit that you can walk into in the splash play, and then a covered area. So even when you've got the tropical storms, you can be out there. And then I never saw it installed, but after my departure that summer, the pre-nursery playground had a complete overhaul. So again, I was installing um, levels of challenge in the landscape and climbing equipment, changing the sand pit, and just I actually overhauled all of the outdoor spaces in terms of resources, but the biggest project in terms of building work and installations was toddlers and the pre-nursery. So had a great level of autonomy to really impact on the environments both in the classroom and externally.
And it's just, I guess it's that comparison, isn't it? Like you said, like it's different. It's going to be different between here and there and different places in the world. But because you've gone from teeny weeny little small village primary school and kind of your experience in a city school, but still a smaller one than in some areas of England. And then that such kind of polar opposite. In terms of, and I guess that affects your leadership, because what you're able to do in a school like in Bangkok is going to be totally different to really what you're able to focus on in a school.
I know, and I think that's where some of the challenges lied in terms of capacity as a leader, because the biggest focus, and quite rightly so, should be the quality of teaching and learning, but alongside that has to come the quality of your environment. So it was everything from upskilling staff about continuous provision and planning, to having meetings with the architects and then the health and safety and whoever else about the environments. And of course, any teacher training doesn't prepare you for that. So suddenly, you might be out there with a hard hat on, or making sure that specifications are right for the age of the children, because we had children as young as 18 months in our toddler setting. So it was challenging. Fortunately, I had an amazing deputy who worked with me, and we still laugh now that we shared a brain, because all the stuff that she hated, I was happy to do, and vice versa. So we think we were really complementary as a team. And she loved tables and lists, and I would be quite happy to go and she was always like, well, it's your head on the line, you have to take the rap. I'm like, that's fine, I'll do that bit, you go and work out a timetable, because I find that really boring.
You're right, that's about the people bit though, isn't it? It's finding and building a team of people who do complement you, and the recognition that as a leader you can't be the be all and end all and know everything, but actually to build people around you is the right, like you've already said, kind of elevating people. So I know at the start, and I know kind of your work, that you mentioned that you've returned to the UK, and that some of your work now is working for Ofsted, which I feel is a really interesting bit to talk about, because it's a big thing at the moment, accountability. Certainly this year, and last year, with for a range of different reasons, it's become a big piece in the media, and it's a big topic of conversation for school leaders. And so my nosiness is about asking, I guess, about your reasons for wanting to do it and be in it, and a little bit about how it feels to go in, because you've switched from being the leader to now going in, and in its most basic form, making judgments of that. And I guess I think I actually, as you were talking, I remember that when we had the Ofsted phone call at that little village primary school, and I was the head, you were there when we had the call. Do you remember?
I think briefly.
I think we were doing. I don't know if we were doing handout. I don't know, but you were there, and I remember I was really excited. So I was like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, they're coming. And you looked
Yeah.
at me and you were like, I don't think anybody is excited about this. You are crazy. But I remember
Yeah.
at the time, think because of the situation we were in as a school, I was pregnant. So I was like, great, I get to do this while it's still me. And
Yeah.
at that
Yeah.
point, I was just so excited to celebrate. For me, it was a celebratory, like, of course
Yeah.
it was nerve-wracking.
Yeah.
And I think that was about
Mm,
where the framework was then. That was the older framework.
mm,
Leadership was just different then.
yeah.
But
Yeah.
it felt very positive. And I just know that now, speaking to heads, that they're not excited to get the call.
Mm,
It's
mm,
different. So how does it feel being on the other
mm.
foot? You're the one making the
Yeah.
call or going
Yeah.
in.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, it's really interesting. And you just said previously sort of why, why I was doing it. And my rationale was for two reasons. On a personal level, when I was returning to the UK, I was pregnant. Um, I wanted to maintain my career, but I needed something that was flexible and enabled me to freelance, because so I work in a what we call a contracted capacity for Ofsted, which means I'm not employed by them and I can do as little or as much work for them as I like. And so I wanted that flexibility to predominantly be at home to raise my daughter in those early years. But I was also really keen to understand the methodology behind an inspection, particularly in early years. So, having undergone, I think I've been privy to 3 school inspections where I have been class teacher. I always remember feeling almost aggrieved at times by thinking, well, there's no one on this inspection team that I can see who is an early years specialist. And so very happy to have an inspection, accountability and all of that. But I wanted there to be someone within the early years who has an early years background, who really gets it. And so aren't going to be making comments or judgments, which actually, perhaps you wouldn't be saying if you weren't a specialist. In my naivety, when I first started looking at how you might on board with Ofsted, I hadn't realised that actually school inspectors and early years inspectors are 2 different remits. And so it quickly became apparent that actually I wanted to be an early years inspector, not a school inspector. Not that I wouldn't do a school inspection, but my passion and my niche is around those really early years. And so I thought, well, this is really interesting. I can hopefully go out and make a difference in the sense of ensuring that children are having the best possible start to their early education and that they are safe. But also, so many providers that I speak to are really positive about the inspection because they want to celebrate what it is they do. And we must remember that I inspect childminders, I inspect daycare settings, whether it might be a nursery, it might be a preschool, it might be as few as a few children at that setting, or there could be dozens and dozens. And I said to you earlier on when we were off the record, on occasions we'll go out and do a dual inspection because setting so big it needs 2 of us. And my driving force has been, I want to celebrate what our providers are giving our children, but I want to make sure that our children are getting the absolute best that they deserve, because we know as early as practitioners that the foundations that are laid in birth to 5 are formative for their future success and life chances, and they only get one chance at that. And if that isn't as good as it can be, we could potentially be spending the rest of their lives trying to make up for that, at the very least, the rest of their educational career. And so I put forward a letter of interest, and then you go through the recruitment, which is very rigorous. And you have to have been in a good or an outstanding setting to even, set foot into the interview room, as it were. But it's more than an interview; it's an awful long process. Not awful, but a long process.
Awfully long.
Yeah, awfully long. And then I remember my, you know, you go out on shadows. So it's quite some time before you are the inspector. You go out on shadows, and I remember just being really fascinated by seeing what an inspection looks like on that side, and how you get to those judgments. And then when I had my sign-off inspection, I was absolutely petrified. And what all of your colleagues tell you is that they will not know it's your first inspection, that it's your sign-off inspection. But and sometimes now I will drive to an inspection and think, I can't believe I'm doing this. Like, I'm really nervous about it. And what about this? And what about that? But obviously, most of the time, I'll meet and greet the nominated individual, the manager or the provider, and they'll say, well, and often, not wishing to be sexist, they say the girls are really nervous. Because as we know, the early years workforce is predominantly women. And I do my utmost to meet and greet as much as the workforce as possible. And I say to them, I know this is nerve-wracking. I've been through inspections myself, but this is a chance for you to showcase what you do. And this, I'm sure, will be a celebration of all the great things that you do. And fortunately, during my time of inspecting, I've had very, very positive inspections. And often my final words are, your report's going to read brilliantly, because it is a celebration of the terrific and unique and wonderful things that these providers do, which perhaps, I'm sure they wouldn't want to go through an inspection in order to celebrate it, but perhaps might not otherwise ever be uncovered and celebrated. So it's a tricky one. You never want to arrive at a setting and feel unwelcome or feel like you're the enemy. And I really hope I don't come across as that. And I don't think I am. I feel like I've built a really nice rapport, though you helicopter in and back out again. But I have had previous managers contact me post inspection to say, oh, it was brilliant, and I want to learn more about what you do, and how do you do it, and I want to do this. And this particular provider, she led an outstanding setting, and it was the first outstanding setting that I personally had inspected. And we're always taught none of it's about your gut, it has to be evidence. And when I'm talking evidence, I'm talking, we submit thousands of words of evidence to quantify our judgments, and it's very strict criteria. But I knew it was outstanding because I had the evidence. But there was this one particular point where I couldn't stop her talking. She was telling me all these things. I couldn't keep up with my evidence, and I was choked. I was totally choked, because I was like, I can't believe you're doing this, and I can't believe you're doing that, and that's brilliant. And the funny thing was that when my evidence was submitted and before my report was published, that it just so happens that report and my evidence went through quality assurance, which is the standard procedure for us, like every few inspections. And the lady who's quality assuring me, she was like, Leanne, your evidence is just so much. You need to cut down. I was like, I know, but I worry. One, because if it's an outstanding, I need to have the evidence to quantify it. And secondly, couldn't stop her talking, but she was so passionate. But I remember being in the loop thinking, pull yourself together, Leanne. But it was because I was just so in awe of what this setting was doing for these children. And they had a lot of children who, well, not a lot, but a considerable number of children who had really complex needs, and they were going over and above for these children. And I think that's what we want to focus on, what we want to celebrate is, these incredible things that these providers are doing. But whenever we get an outstanding setting, we're not allowed to award outstanding to the provider until we have gone and phoned it in, and we, have to justify that. And I remember the lady on the end of the phone of Q of the line that we have, duty line is what I was trying to say. And she's like, I can hear it in your voice, Leanne. I can just hear it. Like, I know they're outstanding. I'm like, I know, but I need to tell you this. I need to tell you this. And that is the best feeling, because inspections are hard. They're really hard for the provider. They're really hard for us. We have a lot to get through, and we can't leave until our evidence is watertight and secure, and that we feel secure that judgment is completely robust, and would stand up if it went to tribunal. But when you get to drive away from that setting thinking, you're outstanding, you absolutely deserve it, those children are so lucky, what a brilliant place. And then you're just waiting for that report to be published because, you know, an outstanding report, as you well know, is a great thing.
Yeah.
So
And
yeah,
I guess what a privilege to be able to go and do that, like sharing the positives of it. And actually, I think we wouldn't often think about an inspector having their own feelings about being nervous
yeah,
and worried and
yeah,
concerned about the judgments, because it can be all consuming for a leader. So it's
yeah.
really refreshing to hear that perspective, and it is a real privilege, isn't it? I wondered, as you were
Mm,
talking, you know, like not wanting to be unwelcomed, and we know that, as I said when I started asking you about it, like there's so much negativity around accountability, but that's just one
mm,
strand of what we're talking about. And ultimately, you guys are the ones you're the ones that are actually going into schools. So we're talking about, okay,
mm,
accountability is the curriculum, the financial issues that we've got in schools at the moment, the problems with, you know, supporting children with SEND. Like there's so much that is not great in the education system.
yeah,
And
yeah,
inspectors are the ones that actually go into the schools. So either are the ones that are making the judgments, but they're also the ones that are getting the brunt of that, the feeling from leaders that things are difficult. But it's, you know,
mm,
not the inspector, that person's fault, problem,
yeah,
you know, that
yeah,
like
yeah,
we're in the situation we're in. There are so many challenges, aren't there? And I wondered
yeah.
whether you kind of had any negativity in just about your choice to do that. That as do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Have you had any
yeah,
people judging you for being
yeah.
that?
And it is one of those things because it's not something I sort of go around broadcasting because people say things like, "Oh, you know, you've gone to the
Well, now
dark
it's on a
side," or
podcast.
yeah, I know, I know. Suppose I end up, you know, feeling like I need to justify myself, and
Yeah.
I did go into it for personal reasons and professional reasons, but I feel like actually what that does is when I go in, like not too long ago as a school improvement partner, and I offer consultancy. I know how I can help people in the best possible way because I know what it's like as a teacher. I know what it's like through Ofsted lens, and I know what the challenges are. So I hope I'm the package to be able to really support. And I have to say, in terms of providers, I would say 98% of my inspections have been really positive with a positive outcome. Um, the provider has been happy with the judgment and the recommendations, and that's, you know, if there are recommendations, and it's always very, very transparent. So the nature of the way in which we inspect is that you take that provider on the journey with you. So you are constantly feeding back your findings, having conversations, checking you on the same page. So nothing should ever be a shock. That said, there have been a couple of inspections whereby the overall judgment has been contested post inspection. And sometimes that's just through kind of their personal opinion as to what their setting is. But actually, though it might be great, it's not outstanding. And the evidence just doesn't match up. It's not to say they're not a terrific provider, but unfortunately, you are either good or outstanding. You're not good, like you're not very good. And
Mm-mm.
the criteria for outstanding is very, very exacting. So I would say there is an element of leeway and it's quite broad and good. But to be outstanding, you have to achieve all of the good criteria and all of the outstanding criteria, and it has to be precision, you know? So that's why outstanding judgments are rare, not because there aren't brilliant settings, but you have to literally tick off every single element of that evidence. Um, and so there have been a couple of inspections which go to complaints. And that always feels really personal when you think, oh gosh, it's a horrible feeling because you then know that there is an investigation. And so they go through all of your evidence, you know, they take on board everything that the provider has submitted, but it goes through that procedure, which is, you know, robust. And then a written statement is issued to the provider. And in both cases, my judgments were maintained, they were, upheld. And one of them was with a joint inspector who was very experienced, and so I felt like it's okay. I was second inspector. I
Sharing the
wasn't the
load a
lead,
bit.
and sharing the load. And she's been doing it for a long time and very, very experienced. But you do take those things personally, and I haven't had any direct negative comments about my career choice. You get sort of tongue-in-cheek comments, but I did say to you just when we spoke prior to going live that I had someone sort of challenge me just last week in a social situation, and I responded in a very diplomatic, smiley way and said that actually I've had really, really positive feedback to the point where people say, "You're so lovely, thank you, really appreciate it." And I would like to dig deeper with this one particular person and sort of say what made you feel, you had to say that comment, because actually it's quite offensive. And
is that about us being surprised about you being quite nice?
yeah, and yeah, so
Like, oh, I didn't
surprising
think
that.
you'd be like, I mean, I don't know
Yeah,
whether you had
yeah,
this early in your career as well, but I remember when I was first head teacher and people just going, oh, you don't look like the stereotypical head teacher I thought. And I was like, well, what is a head teacher supposed to look like? I don't know.
yeah,
Like, oh, you're a bit
yeah,
young, or oh,
yeah,
you're quite happy, or whatever it is, like their expectation of what
yeah,
that job role is.
yeah, yeah,
Actually, the fact that you're
yeah.
what they expected, well, I'm like, well, that's your problem,
I
not
know,
mine.
and I think it was, I'm sure it's come about because of the amount of presence that
Yeah.
Ofsted has had in the media, and you know that has been quite catastrophic, very catastrophic. From my perspective, a very isolated case. But like in any profession, you just wouldn't tar everyone with the same brush, or make comments about people's career
That's what I mean
choices.
about like there being so much more to it, because Ofsted and the people, and the inspectorate are one part of the bigger framework that we have as a sector. It's not,
Yeah, yeah,
the inspector's not making the curriculum, but you are.
no,
Yeah, so there's just so
mm,
much complexity to it, isn't
yeah.
it? It would
And
be.
also,
Well,
yeah, sorry, go on. No, it's also really it's really worth noting that so many inspectors, certainly in the early years workforce and in my region, are serving practitioners. So they are in both camps. They're in school teaching every day. They are subject to Ofsted, school inspections, but then they go out and inspect early years settings as well. And I have to say, I am in awe of my colleagues in the Southwest region who work for Ofsted. They are so knowledgeable, so passionate, so caring, and just the most lovely people. And I think actually at heart, we're all early years practitioners. And so we are going to be lovely, because
it's a
that's
special group of people.
naturally our disposition.
Yeah.
So it only takes one case for things to have gone wrong for suddenly that, society's perception
I guess,
to be
and
quite damning.
yeah, and what there is so much in the media, isn't there? And we know that
Mm,
what I've always felt or recently felt is that we're not necessarily just talking about the inspection, like the actual day or days is not necessarily what makes the accountability system as challenging as it is. Like
mm,
I've had, two inspections as head, and they've both been very positive. Those
mm,
days were not necessarily the bit of it that was really challenging and hard. The bit
yeah,
was the full expectation, what you're supposed to be doing, the gathering of the evidence, the feeling, that uncertainty around, well, when is it going to happen? Like
yeah,
so that part for me personally is hard. The actual
mm,
inspection and the fact that absolutely, yes, we need to have an accountability and we need to have
mm,
partnership working with professionals and people who can come in and check those judgments is
yeah,
is rightly so. For me, it was the broader spectrum of, but actually is what we're inspecting the right thing to be inspecting, and then and is the
yeah,
fact that you don't know it's coming right, and all of that stuff is just,
yeah.
that's so
Yeah, and
much bigger
it's
picture. I
a
think
waiting game, isn't it? And I think that's what's hard, and that puts people's nerves nerves on edge. And I think, you make an interesting point. It should be noted as well that in judgment, those judgments, well, those day or two that, Ofsted are in, it's not just those 2 days that the judgment is derived from, because there is so much history, isn't there, before, during, and after, because of those conversations that you have. So it's not just, they've not had a great couple of days and so they're this. Actually, it's about the journey, where you've come from, where you're going, and how you're getting there. So it's a much broader picture, but
it's a complex one. I do wonder what will happen and where it will go. I guess the other bit that you are privileged to, which I from an earliest perspective and being nosy would love to know a bit more about, is you're privy to lots of different settings, see kind of some of the challenges for early years providers, but also for children. Like, I think that's something that head teachers often say, oh my gosh, this is, our children are really struggling with this over the last couple of years, or we're finding this really difficult. And actually they're sitting in their bubble and they don't necessarily have the information. I mean, there's lots of national statistics out there, and some of that, end of year data, but the nitty gritty of actually what we're seeing as a nation, of kind of a pattern of things that are really difficult. I'd love to hear a little bit of insight about that.
Yeah, and I think I just had a thought come to mind, which is just gone, but I think the landscape has significantly changed for our settings and for our early years children, and particularly I think post COVID. And I think there are a great level of challenge for settings, which I'll go on to in a moment, but also a huge thing that I, talk to providers about is the fact that they often feel quite isolated and quite alone, because they don't have those networking opportunities that you might have if you're in a school, for example. So, if you're in a large school, you've got your colleagues, you might be 3-4 mentoring, and you can share best practice and ideas and, bounce off one another. If you are part of a large multi-academy trust, you might then branch out, and periodically meet up with other early years practitioners and kind of just feel supported. Whereas if you are an independent setting and there might just be 5 or 6 of you, that's it, and you might have the privilege to network with other early years practitioners periodically, but it's often once in a blue moon, because they do not have the time nor the funding, and in some cases the energy to then to network. And I find that a lot of childminders who work completely in isolation really struggle with that, because they are trying to be the childminder, the accountant, ensure that they continue with their CPD, ensure that they're up to date with all the policies. What else are they? They're everything.
They're HR, they're admin, they're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And then some of them say, well, one lady said, every Tuesday night is my like CPD night, and I log on it. And now we have a wealth of CPD available to us via online platforms, which back in the day we never had. We would, we'd all go to the Devon Hotel and have an amazing lunch, and that was your your CPD for that term. So it's much more accessible, but again, it comes down to time and money. But in terms of, I suppose, if I were to say, the main challenges, and it's no news to anybody, so recruitment, oh my gosh, it's so hard. So lots of settings, and I've been through this myself. I was trying to recruit in the last setting that I was working at. Trying to get a level 3 practitioner was like, trying to buy a unicorn. It was so difficult, and I just couldn't believe it. So in terms of recruiting staff, and not just staff, but the right caliber, you want people who want to be there. You want people who are passionate. You want people who want to learn with you and develop. So I think, first of all, recruiting, and then of course retention, because the industry is getting so much harder. There are people who are resigning left, right, and centre. So settings are closing, childminders are resigning, and then retention of staff in settings is difficult. So I think just having a stabilised workforce is really difficult, and particularly because the more disruption you have in your workforce, fundamentally that disrupts your children's development, doesn't it? Because certainly in the early years, the key person approach is that they will feel safe and secure and be really, well known to the whole family. So I think that, as we know, there's the recruitment campaign, and the rollout of more funded hours. That's a whole nother conversation.
That could be a whole podcast episode.
Yes, so I think that's really difficult. Just finances full stop, in terms of settings being able to fundamentally meet children's needs first and foremost, by perhaps needing to buy specialist equipment or resources, or just enhance a space to perhaps plug a bit of gap in children's development. So it always comes down to money. It might be the most basic of resources. It might be to redevelop an outdoor space, because we all know that lots of children have suffered in their physical development as a consequence of lockdown. And I guess in terms of that knock-on effect of the lockdown, I have a lot of providers who say, speech and language isn't where it used to be. Certainly in an inspection I did, that was just, we were sort of coming out of lockdown restrictions. They had invested a lot of money in their outdoor space to provide for more physical development opportunities, because the demographic of where they lived or where they were based meant that a lot of children lived in flats. And then, of course, they've been on lockdown. So physically, their development was so far behind where it should have been. And I think there has been a regression in speech and language communication, and things like just catering for their own basic needs. So I think the nature of our children can be now that overall they require a greater level of adult attention and input and support. And that might just be for a short time, or it might be a long-standing requirement, in which case you're then seeking to get support from external agencies. And that, as we both know, is a massive challenge. The waiting list, the complete saturation of the system. So many settings that are good and that are well equipped and have a good knowledge of how to support children with SEND do that as a matter of course anyway, and are doing the best they can given the circumstances. But again, we know that until that assessment is done, until perhaps there's a diagnosis and the funding and resources and equipment if needed, that child isn't going to be thriving as they should. And for every week that passes, that makes a difference. So I think there's really unprecedented challenges in our sector at every level at the moment, and it feels like it's just getting harder. That said, I can't remember the exact statistic from Ofsted, but it's something like 96% of settings, early year settings, are good or better. So if our settings are reaching these outcomes in this level of challenge, imagine what they would be had they, if they had everything they need.
Yes. And that could go either way, couldn't it? Because that can go from a government perspective. Well, it's okay, this many settings are doing great, and actually, but you're right, we need to think about, but what if? And the things that you've talked about are struggles for schools at all levels, which I think that the childcare sector and that early years sector is easily forgotten in the bigger picture of some of the school leadership, because we just, that importance, it's sometimes, it absolutely astounds me, just not put on to those earlier settings. And we could spend a whole another hour talking about how we need to, somebody used a really great phrase like reprofessionalize. We don't even know if it's a real phrase, but it sounded good. The workforce and the perspective.
Completely.
How teachers are viewed, but how early years professionals, they are professionals, and that is something that we need to make a real shift in this.
Completely. And interestingly, a couple of months ago, I did a podcast with a company. I don't know if you want me to name them or not.
You're welcome to.
So I did
other podcasts are available.
Yes, other podcasts are available. I did a podcast with the National College on exactly that subject, which is raising the profile of our early years workforce and to celebrate all the incredible things that they do. Because I think historically, people haven't recognised their importance. And, in some cases, people coin the phrase glorified babysitter. And perhaps historically that has been the case, but the expectation on our early years workforce in terms of the level of expertise and dedication and the challenges, that's the bar's only raising, isn't it? Rising even. And it has to be reprofessionalized. It has to be recognized that these people are professionals and they need to be recognized and rewarded accordingly.
Because they, in my experience, are the ones that always go above and beyond. Like, every teacher out there is amazing because it's just a tough job. But
Yeah.
even recently I've been in a school where, for example, break times, like lots of earlier settings might have a rolling, don't necessarily have a break time. So those teachers, those TAs, the adults working in that setting, like, they don't have a break. They don't,
No.
they go in, which is maybe reasonable in the idea that you go, oh, we have a break every 4 hours or whatever the logistics are supposed to be. But if you step into another year group, and I'm not suggesting that all teachers sitting in the staff room having a cup of tea, because they don't, but I just see a difference in how early years professionals can be working and spending often a lot more of their time with the children and having that way they might have a lunch break, but they don't necessarily have a break, or actually a lot of their break is spent with the children, and there just is a shift often, but I just don't know if it's seen because because, as you said, they are lovely and wonderful, and I feel like whenever I go to I was at a conference like last year, and it was whole of kind of education, I felt like I could just spot the early years people out there, like it takes a special sort of person that has a glittery aura, because you just know, and then you find your people. They just do it, and it's part of what they do, and they maybe we don't stamp our feet
I just don't
say,
think
do you know
it's
what needs to be
recognized,
different?
So
Right,
there's
celebrate
lots
them
of
more.
work to be done.
Indeed.
Absolutely.
Oh, Leanne, thank you so much for your time. I'm really just conscious that before we started recording, you mentioned snakes and possibly rats to me. I feel like you need to tell me like a super quick funny story.
Okay.
Something that's happened to you.
Well, I'll go with what I call my rats and rhubarb story, because this was neither funny for the provider nor for me, and I'll explain why. So if you can imagine, this is my sign-off inspection. I am super nervous. I have another inspector, a senior inspector with me, because they don't know it, but she is inspecting me. So on your sign-off inspection, you have an inspector with you, you put through your paces. They just think it's normal quality assurance, and it happened yearly, which it does. So if you can imagine, we are going through the inspection. We are near the end of the day, and just about to wrap up for feedback. And we are in a good place. We are a secure, good. But throughout the course of the day, there had been a little hiccup, which blends into the bigger picture. And the children were outside, and they were going to be cutting up some fruit and vegetable, and they start pulling up rhubarb leaves. Now, I didn't know this, but do you know, or did you know, that rhubarb leaves can be toxic for children if ingested? No. Well, neither did I. So the lead inspector is saying to me, do you know that they are toxic? I was like, no. What do we do? So she's like, shall I have a word with him? And this is the manager, like the owner of the setting. I was like, yes, please do. So he's grief stricken. We look out the window and he's yanking this rhubarb out the ground, and sort of comes back in a bit flustered, like, it's removed. We've had other inspections and it's always been there and no one's ever said anything, but is that okay? Will it affect my judgment? We had the conversation to say, well, look, the children have since washed their hands, you've removed it. We always are come back to what's the impact on children. There will now be no impact because that's removed. So we'd got through this, and we're standing, just having conversation, saying, right, just about to go back. We're going to take some time now to review evidence, start collating feedback, be with you in about 20 minutes or so. And with that, our eyes turn to the patio doors, and there's a rat on the decking, just standing there, having a little groom, having a look around. And we look at the rat, and then we look back at the provider, and he just goes ashen. And we're like, right, okay, there's a rat on your decking. Like, is that normal? Like, no. never seen a rat here before. That's not normal. We're like, right, okay, well, we need to have a little look and talk about what's going on, because fortunately no children were outside at this said time. But what had happened was, it seemed, the children, it was the summer, they were having their packed lunch on the decking, obviously some crumbs, and the rat decided that that would be a lovely place for a picnic post lunch. But it then materialised that the provider had a bit of a difficult situation with the premises next door. So he took us upstairs, at which point, with a particular window where you could oversee the grounds of the setting and the next door neighbours. Next door was like a jungle. There were like furniture and I think like dilapidated cars, and you could barely see it for the, for the undergrowth. And it then materialised that he had been trying to get them to tidy the premises because of any, effect upon their setting. But in a roundabout way, we had said, okay, well, you might have never seen a rat here before, but you might have wanted to be a bit more transparent about the difficulties that you're facing. And you say that you haven't seen a rat here before, but how do we know whether that's the case or not? And at this point, I was thinking, I can't believe this happened. I'm just about to wrap up my sign-off inspection. I now don't know what to do, because what if I make the wrong judgment? So myself and the inspector, then we go and sit in a room to have a conversation. And when you have your quality assurance inspector with you, they act as duty. So in normal circumstances, when you're on inspection by yourself, you would phone duty and say, this is my situation, can you help? She was acting as duty. So I was going, well, it is a problem, but it's not a problem because the children weren't there and there hasn't been an impact. And we now know that he's contacted environmental health at X, Y, and Z. So what more could he have done? Probably nothing else, but he should have told us. He should have informed us. What do I do? What's the impact on children? There's no children there. So I spent about 45 minutes going through my evidence, going around the houses. And I said, I feel reassured that he's taking appropriate measures. He could have done anything else other than told us about this ongoing difficult situation. And I think it did materialise that he knew that there were rats there, but they hadn't seen them on the premises before. So I then call him back in for feedback so much later than we'd anticipated, because I've been going around the houses.
He was freaking out,
rat to rhubarb. And we awarded a very positive judgment. But I, of course, had to make that judgment myself. And it was, I remember with the inspector saying, I don't know whether to laugh or cry, because not only that, well, this is like my sign-off inspection. It's my first solo inspection.
If it starts like that, how's the rest going to go?
I know. And so I gave a judgment. I submitted my evidence. I wrote my report. I submitted it. But I went to bed that night and I woke up in the middle of the night, almost like upright, thinking, but if I've made the wrong call, I don't qualify. I haven't, succeeded in qualifying as an inspector, because what if I've done that wrong? And then it's become this kind of like story now amongst those of us that work together and know me, that you just can't write it. Just can't write it. So that's my rats and rhubarb story. And he was worried sick, as was I, but obviously he didn't know that I was being put through my paces as well. But I'll save the snake story for another day.
All right. Tell me off air. I feel like that's just a classic education, but particularly early years. Like, you just never know what you're walking into, what is going to happen. And I think probably the best days are the ones where you go home and just go, how is that my life? Like, what's just happened today? You walk in the door. And how was your day?
Timing.
Well, you will not believe.
5 minutes, and that wouldn't have happened. But this poor guy, but that is something that is just, you just couldn't write it.
No, oh, well, there you go. Thank you so much for your time. I've
loved
delving into international schooling and Ofsted and all of those different things. Thank you so much.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to the Stories of School Leadership podcast. We'd love to know what inspired you in this episode, so do get in touch and tell us your thoughts. And please share this with friends and colleagues. If you have time, a review would mean so much. It really helps us to reach more people. If you'd like to connect with me to follow my journey or access some support, maybe supervision, coaching, or early years consultancy, you can find me at Stories of School Leadership on Instagram. I'm Emma Lurie on LinkedIn, or my website is emmalurie.co.uk. I hope you have a great day whatever you're getting up to next, and I can't wait to share the next episode with you.